Hey, good afternoon or morning still, I guess. How are you guys? Fine. My name is Kevin. I'm one of the pastors around here. And I'm glad you guys are with us as we kick this off. All of you sitting out on the field, glad you are here as well. And we're kicking off a new series. And to kind of set the stage, let us read together or hear these words from Jesus in a teaching quoted by one of his disciples, Matthew. And Jesus starts by asking us this question: are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me, get away with me, and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me, work with me, watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. Does that sound like your life? Does that sound like the life that you want? Yes. Right? I know there's some of you, maybe you're new to church and like trying to figure out this Jesus stuff, and you're like, no, that's why I'm here. Like, if that's possible, I want that, but I know I don't have that. But I know for a lot of us in this room and out on that field, we've been following Jesus for a long time, and that is not a description of our life. And the question I think you and I should ask ourselves, if that's what Jesus is inviting us to live like and look like, what it should feel like, then what if you and I are living wrong? Like, what if we're just doing it all wrong? We are trying so much and expecting so much and working really hard, trying to achieve and strive with our lives, and we are stressed out. We've been following Jesus for a long time, and we're more stressed than we've ever been. More worn out than we've ever been. And Jesus is like, that's not how it's supposed to be. And so I'm glad you guys are here as we're kicking off this new series, as Joe said, Should Happens. It's based on a book by a friend of ours named Todd Clark. You can pick up a book when you're headed out there in the lobby after the service. And what we want to talk about for the next couple of weeks is this idea of all that we think should happen in life. And so let's explain it so we're on the same page. When we say the shoulds are the expectations that we place on ourselves, on others, and on God. They are the expectations that we have, and expectations have a unique way of killing relationships, even our relationship with God. These expectations of what we think we should do or become, or what others should do, or what others expect us to become. There's all this exchange of expectations that become like a burden and a weight in our life. They have a unique way of just weighing us down. They're expectations, this like never-ending list of shoulds. Expectations that won't be met. Expectations that can't all be met. And living with this kind of life full of a bunch of shoulds will just lead you to a place of more stress and disappointment and frustration with yourself and with others. It is not the life to the full that Jesus has invited us to live. And I really do believe that this concept has the potential to revolutionize your life and your friendships and your family and your faith and trust in God. That it's actually more simple than we realize if we'll slow down and assess, how is it that we're living our life? How is it that we're defining all that we think we should do or they should do or God should do? And I know that we can all relate with this conversation. It's why it's so practical. It doesn't matter how old or young you are, or if you're a man or a woman, or if you're really successful or not as successful as you want to be. We all have a life and struggle with the shoulds of what we think that we should do or should happen or should not do. And there are good shoulds in life. There are good things that we should expect and want and strive for and achieve and expect of others. There's good ones. But many, many, many of the expectations, they sit on our shoulder and they whisper very destructive, heavy, burdensome things to us. They are not leading us towards the life that Jesus has invited us to, a life that is worry-free, or like less worry, or like less burdens, or easier or lighter. It feels the exact opposite. And I don't know about you. I know for me that I put a lot of shoulds and expectations on myself. And I put those expectations on other people. And I even let other people put those on me. I don't know if you ever feel like there's a lot of people that know how I should be living. You ever feel like that? And so in the series, what we want to do is look at this concept of expectations in life through the lens of Scripture and all that Jesus has taught and invited us, like the reality he invites us to live with every day of our life. The like subtitle of the book, Should Happen, says moving from a should life to a good life. How do you move away from a life that's so bogged down and full of all the should do's, should be, should become, should not do's, and into the life that Jesus invites us to live? So to get us on the same page, let me ask you, if you're anything like me, do you convene courtrooms in your mind ever? Like in particular, when someone asks me to do something with them that I don't want to do, like I don't want to do that or do that with you, or I just don't want to make it, whatever it is, when I want to say no, what I should do is just say no. But what I do is I have a court case, like a courtroom convene in my mind, and I'm immediately on trial indicting myself of why I should do that and why I should not hurt their feelings and why I should whatever. Maybe for you, that's not the struggle, but for you, that courtroom convenes when it comes to work and your expectations, or home and your expectations, or marriage or friendship and your expectations, or God and your expectations. And so today what I want to do is talk about how we take these shoulds and we place them upon ourselves. So not what we expect of others, that's next week, or God, but all the things that we expect of ourselves. The shoulds that we take on of who we think we should be. And this started for every one of us when we were young, right? Didn't matter growing up if you were just playing a sport or in dance or playing the piano or learning guitar or in a choir. We had expectations in whatever we did of what we should become through that. We should be better. We should be the best. This should lead somewhere. And then if we continued in whatever that thing was, for me it was wrestling. I loved the sport of wrestling all the way through high school. And there was just this unending string of shoulds. Man, I should be the best. I should be better. I should be on varsity. I should be the captain of the team. I should become a state champ. I should. And then the worst part is when you don't even live up to all that you think that you should. And then you got to live with the sting of that. And then what you usually do is take how you didn't do all that you thought you should there, and you just start moving on to the next thing. And so then it becomes college, and then marriage, and then parenting, or just following Jesus. If he died on a cross for me, man, there's a lot I should do. And it becomes this unending burden of expectations that we place upon ourselves. And even as a pastor, I remember my wife and family, when we moved to Ann Arbor to lead that campus, it came with an incredible amount of shoulds that I thought. This should be easier. This should grow. This should grow faster. I should be a better leader. I should communicate better. And it became this thing that when I wasn't careful and I wasn't paying attention to it, I started looking for what I thought should happen as a way to speak to my worth or my own identity. And good shoulds, and leading a church, that should be great stuff and worth all the work and the effort, but not when it becomes this burden and this ridiculous idea that if I could not achieve all my unrealistic expectations, that it was unacceptable. And I wish that I could stand here today and be like, I am now should free, but I'm not, and I know you're not. And I live with tons of expectations of what I think I should do and should do better, and I know you do the same. So here's what I wonder. What are the shoulds that have been sitting on your shoulder, whispering or shouting at who you should be? What are the one or the two main kind of expectations that just weigh you down of what you think you better fix, you better become, you better do, you better not do again? What is that in your life? Most of us, we all battle with kind of two main forms of shoulds that we place on ourselves. The first we'll call the public shoulds. These are the unrealistic expectations that we have picked up from somebody else and adopted them as our own expectations of ourselves. Perhaps you had parents who raised you, taught you that you should get married and you should have a truckload of kids, and yet you are single and you should be able to enjoy that, but you can't enjoy that because you have this expectation of yourself that you should already be married. Or maybe you have a spouse who has put some expectations on you about fitness and taking care of yourself. You've adopted that as your own, and it has put you in a place of constantly being stressed out and exhausted and worried about your weight or about your appearance because of what you think you should be or should look like. Or maybe it's a boss that you have who thinks that you should have your job be the number one priority in your life like it is in his life. And so it doesn't matter how many hours you work through the week, it's never enough. And then on the weekend, when you're supposed to be off, you work through the weekend because you just want to prove your commitment or just keep up. The public shoulds that we get from other people become these heavy burdens that we carry around with us in life. But I think the heavier burdens are what we'll call the private shoulds, these are the unrealistic expectations that no one spoke these to us. We don't know where they've come from, but we know that they are very core to what we expect of ourselves. It is an ending string of shoulds. Let me give you a couple examples. See if you can relate or find yourself in these. You feel like you should be the first one to work every day, or you should be the last one to leave every day, or you should have the best behaved kids, or you should have the smartest kids, or you should be the smartest person in every conversation, or you should be the funniest person in every conversation. You should be further along in your career by now. You should be able to overcome that addiction, that hurt, or that habit, or hang up on your own and not have to let anybody in on that thing. You should own your own house and have kids by now. You should have kids who are out of your house by now. You should have a house that is always ready to be featured on HGTV. You should be more loving, patient, motivated, generous. You start just heaping on the shoulds. You should pray more, be angry less, waste less time. You should go on more vacations. You should spend more time with your kids. You should want to spend more time with your kids. You should have more fun. You should laugh more. You should make other people laugh more. You should lose some weight. You should drink less. You should go on more dates with your spouse. You should want to go on more dates with your spouse. You should be better. You should be smarter, richer, funnier. You should forgive. You should forget. You should. Listen to me. We are competing in an unwinnable race. You can't win it. You cannot become all that you think that you should be. You just can't. There is not enough time in every day or week or in your life. There is not enough energy within you to become all that you think that you should be. This cannot be the way to live into the fullness of all that Jesus has come to offer us and give to us. It's unwinnable. Because even the good shoulds, the expectations that we have that are great, they all lead us in the same direction to this infinite list of shoulds, and you and I can't do anything infinitely. There just simply is not enough time in our day to do all that we think that we should. If we try to do them all, and if we try to care about everything and everyone, we will quickly find ourselves with nothing to give, caring about no one or anything. And so what is the solution? The solution is grace. The solution is called grace. It's that simple and yet profoundly difficult to really live as if you believe it, not know it. To fully understand the grace of Jesus, the acceptance of God, the unconditional love demonstrated for you on a cross long before God knew all the ways that you would not be all that you think that you should be then or in the future. And yet on that cross, he showed you that he loves you and invited you to live from a place of grace every day, to live like you are loved, not trying to earn it, not trying to deserve it, not trying to get your security, identity, worth, or value in anything else or from anyone else in this life. So to follow God is to understand this grace. To really understand what Jesus is inviting you to and how to live, you must start with the grace that is brought to us from Jesus and through Jesus. We'll read again these words from Matthew 11, where we open. This time we'll read from the NIV translation of the Bible. Hear again what Jesus is inviting your life to look like. He says this, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. For I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Now when he refers to yoke, what he's talking about, he's not like yoked, but what he's meaning is that it's like his teachings or his lifestyle. He's inviting you and I to apprentice ourselves after his lifestyle. It's not just believe stuff in Jesus, it's live like he lived, become like him. And so anywhere in our life that doesn't feel easy or light, it means we're not living like him, which first and foremost begins that every day we wake up, we live from a place of grace. Totally accepted, unconditionally loved. I like this quote from the book by Todd Clark, Should Happens. He says this, "Jesus didn't come just to remove our sins. He also came to remove our burdens." He didn't just come to remove your sins so you can feel forgiven. He came to show you how to live life not full of burdens. Jesus wants to teach us a new way of living, a life of grace, a grace that's humble and easy and light. Grace means that I don't have to live up to all the unrealistic expectations and standards that I have for myself. Hear me on this. Grace means that when you don't live up to all that you think you should be, you are still loved. When you are exhausted and burdened by all that you think that you should do, you are still accepted just as you are, not as you think that you should be. This is what grace means, and it is all possible because of Jesus. I love this quote from Brennan Manning. I don't know if you've ever read his writings and thoughts. He's brilliant. He said this: Jesus is crazy about you. He loves you just as you are, not as you should be. Not as you think you should be. That you and I can stop placing all these expectations on ourselves because of Jesus. And we can step out of this unwinnable race and we can learn to rest in his grace. We can learn to live our life from the grace of Jesus, to live like we're loved. Not trying to earn it or deserve it. Let me show you this, another example of this in Scripture. If you have a Bible, I want you to open up to Galatians chapter 1 and 2. I'll show you a couple verses there. Hopefully you'll read it more this week. We did a whole series on this last year. When the book of Galatians, it's a letter written from the Apostle Paul to Christians in the first century living in an area known as Galatia. It's modern day Turkey. And he's writing to these people. And what I want you to see is that this issue of expectations and shoulds is not some uniquely Western or American problem. It's not new. They struggled with it just like we do. And so you have these people living in Galatia who are suffering from their own version of these shoulds, living underneath these unrealistic expectations known as the old law or the Old Testament. But these are people who had met Jesus, meaning they've come to faith in Jesus like many of us, which means that we've accepted his grace and invitation to live life in freedom. And given that opportunity, Paul's writing to them because he's confused that why they, in given that opportunity to live in God's grace and his perfect acceptance, why they would choose to go back to a life full of all their own expectations and standards that they could not ever have lived up to. Why would you go back and try again? So jump to verse 6 if you have your Bible open, Galatians chapter 1. And here's what Paul says. I am astonished that you are so quickly deserting the one who called you to live in the grace of Christ and are turning to a different gospel. Now, gospel, churchy word, means good news. The gospel of Jesus is this good news of this grace, this love, to live like him. He's saying you're turning, you had it, and now you're turning from it. Why would you give up on his amazing grace and start DIYing your own version of what you're supposed to do with this life? So Paul's he's astonished, he says. He's for some unimaginable reason, you are returning to a life of comparison and guilt and shame when you have been given access to grace. He's saddened, he's surprised, he's confused why you would give up living in God's grace and go back to that. And when we read that verse, you and I, we should ask ourselves, why would they do that? But then the better question that you and I should ask ourselves is, why do we do that? Why do we do that? We've been given the grace and love of God to live in that freedom, but then we go back to just trying to see if we stack up and can do enough and accomplish enough and somehow to feel worthy. When Jesus is saying, I already proved that. Here's what Paul says next, verse 7. He says, which is really no gospel at all. If it's not the gospel of Jesus and his grace, it's not good news. Evidently, some people are throwing you into confusion and trying to pervert the gospel of Christ. Now, Paul will go on for the next chapter, and he will not be shy about how frustrated he is with these people who are teaching them that they can't just live in the grace and the goodness of Jesus, that there's a bunch of other things that they should do. In fact, at one time in the second chapter, he'll talk about them like spies trying to infiltrate the freedom of the community of Christ and make us slaves again to laws and rules and regulations. These people were teaching that though Jesus had removed those burdens of all those shoulds, that we should put them back on ourselves. That doesn't make any sense. So what's happening behind the scenes here is that the early Christian movement were primarily mostly Jewish people, right? Jesus was Jewish. It started in Israel with Jewish people. And so the first people to become Christians were Jewish, and many of the first, therefore, leaders leading the Christian movement were Jewish people. And so what you had in some cases were these Jewish Christian people who were taking their old model of Jewish faith and mixing in this new Christian faith with it. So they were seeing Christianity as just an extension of their Judaism, their faith, their rules, and their regulations. They were known as Judaizers. And so they believed that Jesus is great and he died for you, and that's super awesome. So you need Jesus, but there's also a bunch of other stuff that you should do, like about 1,000 other rules from the Old Law and Testament that had to be added onto you to be saved by God. And this infuriates the Apostle Paul. That's why he's astonished. These are the kinds of people we would call them like Jesus plus people. Yeah, Jesus is good, plus a bunch of other stuff you better do. I don't know if you know anyone like that. I don't know if you are someone like that. But these shoulds in life are sneaky. They have a way over time of just kind of coming in where it's like, yeah, it's Jesus plus the way you dress. It's Jesus plus how often you attend church. It's Jesus plus how much theology that you can explain and understand, or the Bible that you've memorized, or that you don't say certain words ever again, or whatever the unending list of shoulds are. And so for these people living in Galatia, they had accepted that Jesus had come to save them from their sins. They began to live in the grace that removes the guilt and the shame and the striving and the comparison, and he brings freedom because Jesus came to vanquish the shoulds in our life. And then for some reason over time, instead of just living in that grace and freedom, they start to reintroduce a bunch of expectations of what else would make them saved. So they were like, yeah, it's Jesus plus you should do this and this and this and this, and you should not do that, that, or that. And so the Apostle Paul in his frustration writes to them. He's like, hey, if all the shoulds, if all of your expectations and your rules and your regulations and your standard and your religious human efforts could save you, then why did Jesus even come? Why did Jesus die? And so if you jump down in Galatians chapter 2 to verse 19, read a couple verses. Here's what Paul is saying about this in his own life to reflect it back for your life. We'll start in verse 19. He says this, for through the law I died to the law so that I might live for God. I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I now live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. I do not set aside the grace of God. For if righteousness could be gained through the law, Christ died for nothing. Paul is trying to clearly communicate to you and I that any conscious or unconscious idea of it's Jesus plus anything is wrong. It's just Jesus. That's it. It's just Jesus and all that he did. It's just Jesus and all that he taught. It's just Jesus and what he accomplished that is enough for you to live the kind of life that he has promised to you, life to the full with the hope of heaven someday. It's just Jesus. And it's understanding that upon his death and resurrection that he conquered death so that nothing else could separate us from him, not even our own expectations for ourselves. To demonstrate and prove that he loves you and I, knowing all the ways that we wouldn't live up to our own expectations of what we think we should, because we can't be perfect. And he came, the gospel of Jesus is his removal of the burden for you and I to try to be good enough, and he became our perfecter. And it's in his perfection that we follow, as he is for us what we cannot be. And we live every day from that place first of love and that grace that he has given. This is what following Jesus is all about. And yet many of us have gotten in a habit of sneaking in all these expectations we have of what we should be or should not be. And then we found ourselves, the longer we followed Jesus, feeling more stressed and more anxious and like we're not even that good of a person. We have totally missed the beautiful simplicity of the good news of Jesus' grace. Let me give you this kind of picture. I love this. I heard this story and I just loved it. It came from an Ivy League university in a freshman physics class. It was a notorious physics class because it was painfully difficult if you got this one professor, which I think all physics sounds painful and avoidable. But at this particular university, anyone who got this professor in that physics class, it was just like, oh, hopefully you'll get through. There was all this kind of lore around like surviving that physics class. It was graded on a very steep curve. Well, this one particular year, that professor at the end of the semester decided to do something he had never done, and he gave those freshmen the opportunity to bring to the final exam one 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper as a cheat sheet. Write down whatever you want on it. Come to the test. And so on the day of the test, all the freshmen walked into their class with, of course, the smallest handwriting any human has ever been able to muster to fit every ounce of information they could to try to pass this test, right? Well, one freshman walks in the class with a blank sheet of paper. And everyone's like, I knew that guy was an idiot, right? Like, that guy's so dumb. So he comes in, he sits down at his desk, takes this blank sheet of paper, and he set it down next to him. In walked from the back of the room a senior whose major was in physics, and he walked up next to that freshman, and he stood on that sheet of paper. And the professor was so, like just enamored with the creativity of this freshman to interpret whatever you can fit on this sheet of paper that he allowed it. And so that freshman sat there and took a test that he was not that prepared for, and every time he didn't know an answer or a question, he asked the senior who gave him the right answer, and he aced the test. And many of us are like, man, I wish I had had that opportunity in whatever class it was that we sucked at. But that in a very, very small way, if you can picture that senior standing on that piece of paper, is a way to understand what Jesus has come and offered you. The Bible teaches us that this life isn't it. This life is just a training ground, a place that we learn and we try to grow and become more, but that this is just the beginning of an eternity that we can spend with Christ. The Bible teaches us that there is a day coming, a final exam of sorts. It's known as the day of judgment. It is a day when all human history and time will cease as we understand it, and eternity will begin. And that day, all humans who have ever lived will stand before God and have to account for all the good and the bad that we have done in life. And what Jesus came to offer you and I is something that there is no amount of human striving and effort and energy that can get you, because that day none of us will be good enough. But for those of us who know Jesus, he'll stand next to us on that cheat sheet of sorts and say, this one is covered by me. I've got them. This is what Jesus came to accomplish. This is the perspective he invites you to live with today. It's a cheat sheet. And when we really understand the grace of God, then we don't cheapen it by just going and living however we want and asking him for forgiveness. Because when we understand the safety net of his grace and the unconditionalness of his love for us, his truth calls us to become more like him every day. To shape our character, heal our wounds, and make you and I a reflection of him to this world around us. That his good grace in our life will reflect and be shown and tangible to those around us. Let me pray for you.